Hi everybody, hola, and welcome back to another edition of the Web of Wyrd with me, your host Davyd Farrell, and my co-host Pete Jackson-Main. Hi Pete, how you doing?
Hi, David. I'm doing good. Been a bit of a stormy one over the last week or so, but I think we survived.
Well, we're still here, we're still breathing, we're still chatting and recording, so we must be doing something right, huh?
Absolutely.
So
Onwards.
onwards indeed. So apologies to our listeners who were wondering what happened to last week's show. The Scorpio full moon happened, and I think we've all been
Didn't it
dealing
just?
with
Didn't it
that.
just?
I certainly have, and I think you have too. And so here we are this week doing, I think probably a more timely edition of Web of Weird, and we're going to certainly be focusing on some of the energies from last weekend's full moon eclipse, which was kick-ass strong, and probably is going to have a massive effect on everything that happens in the world over the next couple of months. But we're going to start the show with our usual roundup of the news, and then we'll go into some more solution plant-based ideas as well. So where to start this week, bro? How about monkeypox? What's your feeling about monkeypox?
Well, monkeypox, yeah. I mean, you get this kind of deja vu with it, really, don't you? And there are already pieces coming out on social media where they've been using pictures of things like herpes in order to illustrate monkeypox, because nobody basically heard of it before it came up this week. I mean, I think I probably had heard of it, but nobody paid any attention. And the first thing I knew about it when it came on was the BBC telling me not to worry about it. And that, frankly, made me think, that's probably why I should be worrying about it. And not because I'm in the least bit afraid of monkeypox or any other kind of pox, but because of what comes behind it, because of what they'll sort of, use it as an excuse to do. And, a couple of other things coming up that I think we're going to discuss, which I think sort of key into this quite keenly. And that one is really the meeting that starts tomorrow of the World Health Assembly, which is the decision-making arm of the World Health Organization, and this new initiative that they want everybody to sign up to, so that we all hand our sovereignty completely over to the WHO in the event of another pandemic. And hey presto, there seems to be another one in the making right there. It's an unlikely candidate for a pandemic because all the things they're saying about it doesn't transmit easily, it's not usually very serious, etc., etc. But we all know that those kind of reversals can turn around in the course of a couple of hours of news time. So not really trusting anything that I'm seeing, and certainly not quaking in my boots at the prospect of encountering a case of monkeypox. And you never know, in my business it may well happen. I may even have had it, I don't know. I had some weird skin thing a while back where I came out in blistering pox and I didn't know what it was, and I couldn't place it. I couldn't find any sort of matching pictures on the internet. So maybe I've already had monkeypox, I don't know. Anyway, and the other thing was, of course, in light of pandemics and things like that, was Bill Gates being reported, and I have seen the footage, as saying that the pandemic wasn't the big, scary beast that they thought it would be. Oh, we didn't quite understand that it wasn't really very serious, or something like that. Well, actually, if you didn't understand at the time, why didn't you employ somebody who did? Because a lot of us sitting around here were like, yeah, we know it's not a big deal. Do you know what I mean? And then the other thing, oh, well, yes, it turns out the vaccines were not quite, as effective as they should have been. Well, you don't say. So this is how they kind of spin things round, I guess. Now we're all supposed to be scared of monkeypox, but we're not supposed to be scared. Don't worry about it. No cause for alarm. But. So yeah, where we are with that, I guess it's only just started. It's only a day or two old, that story. So we're just waiting to see where they go with it next.
Well, at the risk of being tracked and traced, bro, back to you being a secret super spreader of monkeypox on this show. We might have to edit the last 2 minutes out, man, before we have the track and trace guys knocking at our doors going, hey, man, we need to talk to you because you might be the monkeypox man.
I hadn't thought of that. Okay.
But yeah, the narrative is familiar, right? And for those of us who've been following these narratives and either being horrified or amused by them in equal measure at various points, yeah, the timing of it's very interesting, right? So we've got another supposedly dangerous, non-dangerous virus. That's a familiar story too, right? Coming out at the time when, like you said, there's the World Health Assembly meeting in Switzerland this week, and then perchance also in Switzerland this week, there seems to be a WEF annual meeting.
There is.
So yeah, coincidence or not, but they want us to sign up to this global pandemic treaty. But to be honest, I feel like it's a lot of hot air. I feel that this is the last dying clutches of a how to say, a plan that is unraveled, and I think that we're going to see very clearly over the next couple of months further unraveling of all of this, because people often say, where is the disclosure? Well, the disclosure is happening all over the place, and you just have to know where to look. And actually, this is interesting, and we didn't talk about this prior to the show, but I've been looking a lot at RT.com, otherwise known as Russia Today, very much vilified in the Western media as being biased, undemocratic, and censoring freedom of speech, which sounds very familiar to what happens in Britain and most of the West, actually. But what I found is that, when I read RT.com, is that it has a whole range of really interesting stories about what's going on in the world that are not being reported in the Western media for a variety of reasons that we can probably imagine. But also, as we discovered when I sent you those links, it turns out that our freedom of press in Britain doesn't extend to RT.com, does it?
No, it doesn't. I tried various different ways to get onto the RT website. It's all been blocked as far as I can see. None of the links worked. The website is still, it's still on Google, but as soon as you click on it, it's basically blank page, or page not found, or some other message like that. So we have certainly been shielded from RT.com in the UK. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. I know you suggested that I should maybe go via a VPN. I have to say that my grasp of the technology didn't extend to even understanding what VPN was. I'm now looking into it, but I've not got there yet. Virtual personal network, I think, and it sounds very interesting. Sounds like sort of thing everybody should have, but unfortunately I haven't got one yet. But I'm looking forward to getting onto it when that does transpire, when I eventually choose which VPN I'm going to buy, because you do have to buy it. You can't. I'm not aware of any free VPN going.
Actually, I can give you one, bro. I'm just going to share this with. There's a browser which I highly recommend called Opera, and in fact, I think Firefox also has it now, but the Opera browser has a built-in VPN, which you can switch on, and you can decide whether, because basically it's a way of getting around censorship. You can basically mirror to another server somewhere else, and so it kind of confuses. So you can, basically access RT.com via Asia or via South America or something. So there's ways around that, but Opera browser, I have it here. I use it all the time. And yes, it means that you can access pages that are otherwise censored in your kind of country. So now, I also want to point out that Russia Today is obviously very pro-Russian, but I personally find that the stories generally resonate a bit more truthfully in my body medicine than what I read in the Western press. But as always, I would suggest to all listeners, take a spread of where you get your information from. Don't believe either me or Pete. Try and find different sources. Another great one is tapnewswire.com, which we look at. There are other ones like BitChute and Rumble too, but be discerning. Discernment is really important, and I often tell people, if you really want to get to the truth of trying to understand something, listen and see, how does it feel in your body? Does it resonate, or does that feel like a lie? And just apply that across the board, whether you're looking at Al Jazeera, RT, BBC, CNN, or Tap Newswire, or BitChute, any of these sites. Just really use discernment and come to your own conclusions. I think that's super important right now. But so you were talking about Gates as well, right? He's been explaining his business transactions with Jeffrey Epstein, I believe.
Yes, he has. He's commented on that, and he's sort of basically saying, yes, sorry, I shouldn't have done it. I knew what the guy was into, but I thought that didn't have to come into our business discussions, which was like, I'm sorry, Bill, that doesn't really cut any ice with me if you actually did know, because all the revelations with Epstein were out at the time he did it. So there was no excuse for not knowing. I mean, in his position, I wouldn't have touched it with a barge pole. He obviously thought he could get away with it. Bill Gates seems to me a little bit like a man scuttling on the run at the moment. He's sort of coming out with things which are kind of half apologetic, half retraction of things he might have said before. He's no longer the richest man on the planet, of course. So the whole thing is looking a bit sorry and sort of dilapidated for him, which I'm not at all sorry personally to see. Frankly, I can't stand the guy, but I probably shouldn't say that on a public forum. But you know, he's been in my sights for a long time as one of the people I would quite happily see you know, end up as a serious casualty of this whole problem. I think what he's been doing is just execrable, monstrous, and completely inexcusable. So
so you don't like him much, then? Is that what you're
not
saying?
much? No, not really.
Look, man, you know.
I did write a, you know, my penchant for sort of putting things in song. I did write a song about Bill Gates.
Really?
But it probably, I shouldn't say the title on air because it does include a 4-letter word, but it is basically F. Bill Gates. And that's basically the refrain. So at some stage I'll share that with you.
Man, your songs that you're releasing are getting more and more political as the weeks go by, bro. And
I can't stop it. I can't stop it.
But
that was an old one, actually. That was an old one. But there's another one coming up actually as well. But I mean, it's just I just find myself fired up to tell it like it is, I guess.
Good, man. Well, look, you know, if there are any links to that particular track, please do share them, and we can put them in the show notes.
Yeah.
And
Right.
people can feel your angst about Mr. Gates personally through the song. But I concur. He's not my favorite person either. I find him slightly creepy, to be honest, for a number of reasons. But I feel like what we're seeing here with some of these kind of revelations and changes of stance, like our friend the Musketeer that we talked about a few weeks ago. He was also actually in the press in the last week or so, right, for pointing towards the fact that he might get taken out, right? You know, so it seemed like a bit of a strange tweet, unless you understand the story behind it, which is really that he was supplying technology into the Ukrainian situation, helping the less than helpful forces that have set up in the Ukraine that the Russians are trying to remove. And so it seems that at some point that somebody has said to him, it's like, look, buddy, the game's up. Those guys are not going to win. The light really is on the ascendancy here, and you've got a choice. And I have the very strong impression that a lot of people who've been perhaps not the nicest of people have perhaps had some sort of gun put to their head and say, okay, this is your choice. You're either going to be part of the trials that are going to come up as part of the disclosure about this heist that you've tried to pull, or we're going to give you the option to rescind your sins and start trying to change the world. And the whole thing with Musk and the tweet about possibly being taken out is really pointing the finger towards the Clintons, right? And how many people lost their lives around the Clintons who were probably in the place where they might be ready to expose something. So I feel like that a lot of this kind of dirt, and, you know, there is a direct link between Gates, Epstein and the Clintons, of course. You know, just check out the Lolita Express that they all used to get down to Epstein's hideaway. And you can start to see that there is also this upsurge of the Scorpio yuck that's starting to be released. You know, the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case is super interesting. That seems to be perhaps some way of educating the masses to trial by television, or, you know, trials of important people going on television so that we can see all of it. So it's kind of interesting. I think that we've got this energy of Scorpio full moon, which is really about flushing a lot of these nasty, dirty, particularly sexual sides of the rich and famous to the surface, because in the end, you know, a lot of what's been going on over the last few hundred years is a systematic manipulation of humans through these processes, and keeping us all in a place where we can't be the fully expressed humans that we want to be, because we've been carrying shame or guilt or all of these kinds of things that have been inflicted on us pretty much endemically. I think, you know, if you investigate a lot of what's gone on in the north, like, you know, counties like Yorkshire, for example, and particularly Rotherham, you can see that there's always been a very, very strong trafficking problem and child abuse problem in the north. So it's like this is a situation that I think is pretty endemic across most of the world, particularly in Western Europe, that hasn't been talked about. And I feel that with the flushing of all of this to the surface, we've got that kind of Scorpio hidden stuff being brought to the surface, so it can be released, so that we can all be freed of these burdens that seem to, you know, through people like Epstein and their network, seem to have encompassed a large part of the world. And of course, if you do get access to RT.com, you'll become very aware that part of the reason that Putin decided to have his, how to put it, military operation, was to remove the trafficking ring that was being run by the likes of Uncle Joe's son. So there is a lot in this, and if you have the capacity and Scorpio-ness to delve deep, or not even that deep anymore, you will find all of this yuck is very close to the surface now, waiting to be released.
Yeah, some very interesting points there. I mean, with regard to the sort of sordid sex stuff, I mean, this has been bubbling under the surface for quite a while. I've been in touch with people who have been kind of leaking that kind of information for at least 5 or 6 years now. A lot of it sort of coming up around, you know, David Icke, for example. He didn't shut his mouth about that kind of thing. So if you're right, bro, and I really hope you are, and these things are now starting to work their way to the surface, it's high time. It will be shocking, and I think we're all expecting that. I think that there are some people, maybe the vast majority of people in our communities, are going to be seriously upset by all of this, and we don't even have to mention some of their icons who will be implicated. Just wanted to go back briefly to Bill Gates and Elon Musk as well, because they are sort of famously kind of not mates either, are they? I mean, they're always jibing at each other. I mean, I think there was something Bill said quite recently about, you know, having a pop at crypto, because he doesn't own any crypto, and he's sort of, you know, and of course Musk is quite a big backer of crypto, although he won't tell anybody exactly what he's got or what his holdings are. But they've been sparring with each other for some time. Bill, I think, has always been somebody who you instinctively, if you're on a certain, you know, if your mind is open to a certain spectrum of light, you instinctively mistrust him. You know, he doesn't look right. You know what I mean? When they started publishing pictures of reptiles, you know, reptilian human being kind of hybrids, then Bill Gates immediately sprang to mind. Musk is completely different. I don't know where he comes from. And I'm still, you know, I'm still hoping that in some way he'll reveal himself. And I kind of hope that he is a good guy in a way, you know. I mean, I think the whole AI transhuman agenda that he's into is completely ridiculous. And even recently I've been hearing people say, oh, AI transhumanism, it's a done deal, it's going to happen whether we like it or not. But I'm not so sure, actually. He seems to be turning away from it, which is another interesting fact.
Yeah, and just to respond a couple of things there. So crypto has been a big feature this week, right? There are a number of people who've lost out big, and from what I'm understanding, this is the first part of the disclosures and the collapses, that the current economic system is going to be collapsed over the next few months, and a new, what's called the QFS, the quantum financial system, is going to be introduced. That's going to eliminate many of the problems that have plagued the world through the manipulation of currencies. So it's interesting. I have a number of sources on this, and they're saying that basically that certain crypto currencies are going to be okay, but the stocks have gone, and the major the major coins like Bitcoin and so on that have been used for money laundering and a whole bunch of other stuff are being removed. And what might be left is more clean cryptocurrency. So that's interesting. That's literally happened this week, right? And what we can see with the situation in the Ukraine, at least from where I'm sat here in Mexico and just observing it somewhat from a 5D perspective, is that the West is literally bankrupting itself like super quickly through endlessly, seemingly, if this is even true, but seemingly pumping weapons into the Ukraine that the Russians seem to be picking off as they enter. So these weapons that the West seem hell-bent on sending to the Ukraine, and let's, you know, just to make the point here also, is like a lot of Americans are up in arms, like saying, how come we managed to find 40 billion to send weapons to the Ukraine and we can't find 40 billion to feed our own people? Very, very important point, I think.
It's that old magic money tree again. It always pops up when you need it to fight a good war, or have a pandemic, fund a pandemic. Yeah, it
doesn't pop up when your people are starving and cold for some reason.
It's not good enough reason.
No, but if you read between the cracks, and and particularly if you read RT, you'll see that that Europe is really on the brink of major debt implosion. And I think, we can see inflation is already taking over, right? Petrol costs have increased fourfold in the US. They're at an all-time high in Britain. And of course, one of the other things we wanted to bring in this week is the cost of living crisis, right? Because that's a major part of the news right now. I also just want to bring at this point, because this is kind of bringing in some of what's going on in the British political system, is the revelations about Partygate. And for the first time this week, I read an article by somebody who pointed out the same thing that the likes of me and you have been saying for a while, which is like, how come nobody's reported on the fact that nobody seemed to be bothered about the killer virus that was on the loose, which we were all locked up for our own safety, but somehow that didn't apply to the people who were cavorting and thoroughly enjoying themselves with God knows what. And number 10, on numerous occasions, somehow didn't seem to be worried about that. And if we really sit back and think about that, that should have been the first obvious question that all of our media should have asked and haven't. So again, distractions. I feel that what we're seeing with Partygate is this constant, rhetoric that points to the sort of one rule for them and one rule for us, whilst kind of deliberately avoiding the fact that there clearly wasn't anything to be worried about, because they weren't worried, So how is this all going to play out for our lovable mascot of mayhem? Probably not that well in the end. But the alternative, as you called him, Buzz Lightyear, what is it, to infinity and beyond? Our friend Steer Karma. Things aren't looking so great for him either. I feel like he shot his bolt. I don't think he's going to step into the breach now either. He seems to be a spent force energetically, from what I'm feeling.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, again, at the risk of being terribly partisan, I've never liked. I've never liked the guy either. You know what I had to say about him last time, but
I do. But are there any politicians you like, bro? Just out of interest.
Well, there have been a few, very, 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 very few. I do admit that I am one of the people who did quite rate Jeremy Corbyn. I thought he was nowhere near being the kind of politician that anybody would vote for, sadly, but he had a good agenda and he asked the right questions, actually, particularly when it came to looking after people. That was what his big agenda was, and nobody else was saying those things, and they're still not. In fact, now they've got him out of the way, we can pretty much expect, as ordinary individual human beings in our wonderful state of Great Britain, can expect to be shafted left, right, and centre and every which way, because that's what they're doing. They're looking after themselves in their own interest and serving their masters, whoever we perceive them to be, and they still are. Boris, for me, has the tenor of a man awaiting execution, not quite sure when it will strike, and sort of bumbling his way through a few excuses every time he's asked to comment on things, but having no real defense about anything. And he is in the news again this morning in the UK, because the Sue Gray report, which still hasn't been published, has sort of unearthed a few other things, such as the fact that he tried to suppress some photos that were taken of the event, and he doesn't really seem to have much to say about him, and there are sort of pictures of him, and again, one doesn't know what a picture can say a thousand things, as you know, and the pictures that are chosen to put in newspapers are not necessarily relevant directly to the story that the newspaper is carrying. But I find it interesting that they're posting pictures of him now quite routinely, looking completely disheveled. I mean, he looks disheveled at the best of times, but like really even more than usually disheveled, and what's the word I want? Incoherent, but incompetent, I guess, as well. Again, we've all known that since the much. Remind me, if you like, of that statement about the politics is the entertainment division of the military industrial complex, because I think it's just mesmerizing people right, left, and center. They're just looking at all this stuff, and some people must be asking questions like, well, actually, with what's going on, we've got the head of the Labour Party and the head of the Conservative Party both under duress with the allegations that are being made. Who is, in fact, running the country? And I don't see that question being asked in the news either, but it's a very important one. I think we are, in fact, and I welcome it personally. I'm a complete dyed-in-the-wool anarchist when it comes down. If we don't have a leader, that's great with me. We don't need one, but there might be consequences that we do need to think about.
Well, there was a little piece some time back that queried whether it was actually Carrie Symonds that was running the British government. There was that definitely came out for a while, and that Boris, get called upstairs to be told, what was going to happen. Then he would come back down and report to the rest of the cabinet what he'd been informed from upstairs. And of course, Carrie is upstairs. So I don't know whether Carrie Symonds is really the person running Britain. It would certainly explain a lot if she is. But yeah, it's kind of, at what point do we challenge the rhetoric that our so-called leader comes out with, which is really tosh, right? It's, his kind of general excuse is like, well, I didn't know that I was breaking the rules that I set, and I did it in place of ignorance, and so therefore I should be let off.
Yeah,
that's his general, basically, retort. That's absurd. That's an absurd retort.
And it's an echo of the sort of thing I just talked about coming from Bill Gates as well. It's an echo of the whole sort of story that seems to be coming out. Oh, well, we didn't understand. I'm so sorry, but not my fault. Well, sorry, but yes, it is.
Well, and let's not forget those of us who did kind of know what was going on were all censored and shut up, so deliberately so. So I kind of find that a little bit hard to swallow from Mr. Gates, to be honest. If you were genuinely concerned about getting it right, maybe you could have listened to some of us who warned about all of the stuff that subsequently happened over the last 2 years.
Instead of shutting us down.
Yeah. So, but I totally agree. What kind of state are we in when both leaders of both parties are under investigation and have clearly lied through their teeth? But at the same time, I also question where the photos come from and how somebody happened to be walking past the pub at the same moment that Keir Starmer had a beer in his hand and was lifting it to his mouth, and the person decided to take a photo through the window. Convenient, possibly. I don't know. Coincidence, probably not. So
choreography, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we should always be in this place of like assuming that everything is choreographed, because it certainly feels like it. The more you pull back from it and watch the whole show, it definitely is in the realms of the absurd. So from Partygate to cost of living crisis, and I think this is important, right? Because this is where we get to see how much we've prepared for this moment, whether it's on the internal world. Scorpio full moon was designed to show us how much work we have or haven't done. And then in the external world, we're being squeezed, right? So out here in Mexico, things are generally pretty much as they have been. But how is it in Britain, bro? Share with me a little bit about what you're seeing and experiencing.
Well, I have to say that there have been times in my life when it would have been a lot more serious than perhaps it is right now. Everybody's having to tighten their belts to some extent. I'm certainly no exception to that. You do think twice before filling your car up with a full tank of petrol, which the other day cost me £125.
Wow.
I don't think I've ever seen that. So, things are very, very much more expensive, and you do start thinking about economizing. That didn't, however, stop me from driving to Somerset this week on a much needed break. So I guess it's priorities, isn't it, as usual. The other thing, of course, that's really hitting people is the cost of domestic fuel and heating their homes. And again, at this time of year, when weather's beginning to get a little bit warmer, finally now, today's actually been quite hot down here where we are. But come the winter, if the situation is still pertaining by that time, it's going to be quite serious for a lot of people. Other things about the cost of living, food. Now, again, they're reporting that, it's nothing to do with Brexit. When they start a report by saying it's nothing to do with, then I immediately think, right, that's what it's to do with. But they're blaming Russia, of course, for everything. There's no wheat, Russia's fault. There's no fuel, Russia's fault. There's no, I don't know, band-aids.
No ethics in the world, must be Russia's fault. Right?
It must be Russia's fault, exactly. It's taken over from Jeremy Corbyn, I think. The upshot of all of this is that actually it turns out that it is pretty much to do with the fact that the Brexit thing is rumbling on underneath all of these headlines. Don't know whether you've been aware of that, because they're about to trash the agreement that they made to protect Northern Ireland, for example, from I can't remember the details of it now. It's terribly complicated, but because the situation with Ireland and the partition of Ireland, they had to make some arrangement to protect the people Northern Ireland, make them feel that they were still within the Union. And that apparently is being thrown away by Boris now. And that, people have been warning that this is going to be the end of the United Kingdom itself. It's going to basically, it's going to fragment from here on in. And this is being openly said, and yet nobody seems remotely concerned about it, which I find very, very bizarre. But there's this whole Brexit thing. I mean, we did basically dig our own grave when we voted or not to leave the European Union. And frankly, I'm really compromised on this personally, because I have no love of the European Union whatsoever. And the more that comes out about the way that they are behaving, especially now in the face of the Russia-Ukraine situation, the more I'm quite, I could say I'm quite glad not to be associated with them. They're a bunch of terrorists in themselves.
Right.
But on the other hand, if the union meant anything, it meant that people could had a common market. I guess that was actually called the common market for a while, wasn't it? But we could trade with each other. I can't trade over in Europe. I've actually had to stop sending herbal remedies to patients and clients that I have in and across Europe, because they just don't get through. They're impounded in customs, scanned to within an inch of their effectiveness probably, and sent back to me. I can't use them once they're sent back, so it's just a waste of money. I can't even send things to Ireland, and we have a special trade agreement with Ireland that I'm assuming hasn't been breached by Brexit, but they still will not let anything in that I send over there. I had a herbal tea returned to me because it didn't pass the scan, the electronic scan. So it is immensely disruptive, and I think we're just all really starting to find that out, whilst of course our esteemed masters are up there saying no, nothing to do with Brexit. Like hell it isn't.
Well, it's interesting, you just touched on the Ireland situation there, and coming from an Irish background, I always, it's part of my degree is in Irish history, so I'm quite familiar with a lot of it. But what's also happened at the same time is that for the first time, Sinn Féin, a basically nationalist, essentially Catholic party, has become the ascendant power in the north, and so that's immediately sparked talks of a united Ireland, which I think is interesting. So we have this kind of situation of maybe of an island being returned back to its holistic self as an entity, as a piece of land, rather than a divided land, which has had civil war through certainly a large part of my childhood. I experienced it firsthand in Belfast and in the 80s. And, at the same time, we've also got the Scots pushing for independence. Weirdly enough, the Orkney Islands are also pushing for complete independence, not just from Britain, but also from Scotland. I read that some time ago. So it seems to me that, the unification of the British Isles, but with the subdivisions that it's had, is perhaps not the way forwards, and perhaps Britain as an island can be returning to something that's different, that's not the United Kingdom, and we don't even have a king anymore, right? So, and then we've got things like the Isle of Man, which is part of Britain but not part of the UK, because it's an overseas territory, which is very convenient for obviously tax dodging. And so, when we really strip away the structure of the United Kingdom or Great Britain and Northern Ireland, how we look at all of these things, which is often very confusing for foreigners who don't always know the difference between the two. And then we've got these subdivisions of like Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, and even places like Cornwall, which is a recognised ethnic area in its own right, with its own language. And then, of course, the Isle of Man too, and the Channel Islands. So it's like the entity that is the UK is quite a bedraggled beast in its own right, with lots of sort of weird historic nuances that perhaps maybe it's time to go. I don't know. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. I think it's a dinosaur that's well past its sell-by date, whatever that means. But in all of this, and I just noticed in the way that you were talking there, nobody ever talks about England.
Right.
I want an English emancipation. I want England to leave the UK. I think we should really start this up, because it's all over the place. I remember talking to some Irish people a long time ago, back in the days when I used to teach there, before the pandemic came along and stopped everybody suffering. Sorry, traveling stopped everybody suffering. That was weird. But it was a long time ago, and I said, we were talking about England, Ireland political relationships, and this guy, older guy, said, he said, The Irish always had the English to oppress them. But it's the English I feel sorry for, because they've also got the English to oppress them.
Right.
And he's exactly right. You know, if it's not the political masters and the aristocracy of England suppressing everybody in sight, it's ourselves. We've internalized it. I think that Jack D, the comedian, once said, you know, the trouble with the English is they're a bunch of self-hating bastards. And it's time for us to change that. It really is time for us to change that. And we used to go to the Biennale, the big art fair in Venice, because, you know, both of us have been involved in the art world. You know, we did art degrees, and my wife, as you know, is a painter. And we used to go over there, and in the Biennale, they have this garden, the Giardini, where they have a building, what do they call it, a gallery assigned to everybody who contributes. So we have a gallery for France, we have one for Italy, we have one for Norway, we have one for Sweden, we have one for Ireland, we have one for Wales, we have one for Scotland, we do not have one for England, we have one for Great Britain. And I just think that is just so weird. Why do not the English actually, you know, come to their senses over this and create themselves, you know, an identity? Not that I'm particularly into sort of nationalism and identities at all, but it strikes me as being a very, very strange situation that we don't seem to have one. Our identity is hooked up with Westminster and the Queen, for God's sake. You know, that's what. And they're the last people I would want to represent me. Anyway,
I think it's an interesting
bit of a rant. Sorry about that.
No, it's good, bro. I mean, you know, it's a valid point, and it's one I've had conversations with people before, and obviously coming from a much more Celtic orientation, you know, the English have long been the foe, right? And I think it's interesting if you watch series like the Vikings, for example, where you really start to see how the makeup of England is, and you had the Mercians, who are really now the modern Midlanders, and then you have sort of also Vikings in the north, and then in the south you have Angles, Saxons, Jutes, basically Germanic people, you know. So the bulk of the center of what is now Angleland, England, is made up of these various ethnic groups from the continent, and the more, I certainly wouldn't say the Celtic people are indigenous, because that's not also correct either, but the incumbent natives who were here when those people invaded and slowly pushed them all to the western periphery, or what we would call the Celtic people. But you're right. You know, English identity is normally wrapped up in last night at the proms, waving the flags, the Queen, and Westminster. And so English mentality is often wrapped up in being British, which is not necessarily one and the same thing. And so I do concur with you. You know, the other major thing that, of course, English people identify with is the football team, you know, and all of, you know, that kind of identity too, the St. George's Cross, 3 lions on a shirt, you know, that's often, but what's beyond that in terms of English culture?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because English as a language is a global phenomenon. I mean, I don't do this usually. I'm a big confession coming up here, but I did get back quite late the other night from some businesses that we were doing in London, and switched the TV on, and there was the final throes of the Eurovision Song Contest.
Oh, right.
Did you catch that at all? Because this is another sort of festival of hatred towards Great Britain, where, you know, we usually don't get any points. I don't know if you caught this, but we came second, knocked off the top spot by, guess whom? Ukraine. And it was just, you couldn't make it up, or maybe you could, but again, it's that sort of you know, everybody hates us kind of thing. And I think it's, when I actually look at England now, and this is quite a serious point, you know, from the people I move around with, we're not the same anyway. We are a multicolored race. If we're a race at all, you know, there are people of all shades and colors of skin who are English. They speak English. They may have a regional accent that is an English accent, demonstrably, but they are English. And that's the kind of identity that I would like to work towards, consolidating and sustaining, really. Just, you know, your tribe has to be people not necessarily related by blood in that way, but people who see, you know, whom you have something in common with, even if it's just that you share the land, and you have to trade with each other, and you have to get on with each other, and you have to make a life together. That's what's coming, isn't it? I mean, we were talking about this earlier in terms of where we're going to be when all of this what's his name show is over, is back to our own resources. in our gardens, producing what we can produce, helping each other to what extent we can. So this we need. I mean, I feel quite worried, in fact, that our sense of community and identity as a group of people living in a particular geographical location has been decimated by everything pretty much that's gone on within the last few years, certainly, but perhaps actually looking back through most of my life, I can see it happening. I can see a thread running through it all.
So there's a couple of points there, and I just want to loop back to one of them in a minute too. But like you said, something that's caught my attention, which is really about finding our own identities, right? Whether it's at a micro individual level or at a collective national level or cultural level. And, you know, I'd never really quite seen it like this, but the English do have a cultural identity problem that is wrapped up in things like Westminster and the Queen and the sports teams. But if you really remove that, it's, you know, Britain in general has never really been recognized as a cuisine hotspot, and English food really until the last 10 years was pretty much, not to say inedible, but not that great. And so, you know, if we are to open this packet a little bit more, I feel that what you're sharing is important, because it's just like, where is that sense of cultural community identity for the English? Okay, so in the North, you know, Northerners have quite a strong sense of identity, you know, from the Northeast, from Newcastle, from, you know, from Lancashire, from Yorkshire. Those people have a strong identity, as do the Midlanders. But the further south you come into England, the more sort of generic and homogenous it becomes. And then you go to London, and it's just like, London is a very or, you know, let's talk pre-pandemic, but was a very cosmopolitan, you know, kind of a space, but it also had lost its own sense of its own identity. I really observed this very strongly over the last 20 years, that the spirit of London had become completely sterile to the point of not really knowing what it was anymore. And I think this is really important, because I think this is a motif generally across the woke Western world, where we're not really allowed to have personal identities anymore at the risk of offending somebody else through our differences. But if we are to come into community, I think it's important that we go back to grassroots. And you know, Britain has always, under the Union, been divisive. You know, it's often played out through the Six Nations in a more jovial sense, through the football, sometimes with violence. And of course, you know, during most of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s, England was engaged in a civil war with the Irish in Northern Ireland. And that's an often overlooked fact, that in these wars on terror that we've had in the Middle East, that we've been having our own terrorist war. And it's, you know, it's up to you to decide which side of the terrorists in this equation, in Britain for much of the, well, pretty much most of my life. And that's often overlooked. And it's just like, people will sort of look at it when you say, I grew up with terrorism. I grew up with people being blown up and being shot and having to cross the border while, you know, there was shooting going on in the hills. And the RUC were looking for IRA people. So it's just like, you know, that was part of my childhood, as it was for many people in Ireland. And yet on the mainland, most people were completely oblivious until they tried to blow up Margaret Thatcher. And of course, you know, in the modern world, we believed all of that stuff back then. But I'm also now putting big question marks over lots of things that happened, whether they were really like that or whether they were designed to create a show. And who knows what the truth is, right? But I think the important thing is, and this is a bit I want to pick up on, is that we are being asked as individuals to really stand up and empower ourselves and work out, who am I and why am I here right now? You know, it's the big question that I think most humans have ultimately, if they sit and think about it. But now we're being given the opportunity to really see who we are, not just as a 3D person, but as a multi-dimensional person. The shift to New Earth is one where we're shifting to a 5D non-dual awareness. And for some of us, that process has been going on for a while and we've got more stabilized in it. But for the majority of the population, it's still a new experience, and it's still something that seems perhaps unobtainable. But at the same time, you know, our higher mind, our fifth dimensional consciousness, is our intuition. And it's talking to us pretty much all day, every day. And the only trick we have to remember is to listen to it, or not to listen to it and believe what somebody else is telling us. And I think that this whole piece, as we move forwards over the next few months, really, I want to show our audience it's important to stay centered and grounded within ourselves, and really not get pulled into external global stories or even stories of people around us. It's like, this is a process for each and every one of us to come to terms with who we are and why we're here. And that's not something we're going to get from anybody else. It's something we have to find out for ourselves.
Yeah, so many things there, bro. I mean,
long one.
I was going to say, you know, we're talking about strong communities, because I think this is what we're going to need. We're going to need strength, and we're going to need flexible boundaries, because we then have to, you know, form relationships with other communities. But it strikes me you cannot have a strong identity, a sovereign community, if you like, if you don't have sovereign individuals within that. Otherwise, we're just going to be manipulated all over again. So you're absolutely right. You know, we each have to go through our own process with this, and it is it's an astonishing era to be a part of, because there is this kind of things taking place on an almost cosmological scale, you know, with all the astrological lineups and everything that we've been talking about, and global events. But it all also centers into each and every person alive at this point, and the responsibility that we have to finally reclaim our own sovereignty. And I think without that, we're not going to be able to, or we're going to have a hard time surviving what's coming. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know we talked a lot about that before the show started, but I think it's a really good message to give and to make known, because a lot of the shifts that have been taking place, the astrological stuff we've been talking about, you know, for me have been profoundly personal, and I know they have for you too. And I think as individuals, we are, you know, we're huge amounts of resources are being called forth.
I agree. You know, I think it's important right now, like, to really ascertain what is the frequency that we're each operating at. And I have talked about this before in other videos about meeting people at a higher mind level first, in the energetic realms, and understanding, there's a resonant frequency here, we're on the same frequency. And so then, you know, we have the capacity then a little bit further down the road to meet in the third dimension, you know, in the embodied state, but having already met at a much more energetic level. And I've talked about this plenty, and I think that this is a really big part of where we're moving to, because we will find our tribe members, our soul tribe, by frequency. And how do we feel to each other? So, I mean, you know, maybe you've had this with the work that you do, but certainly I've had it when I've been doing clearings on people. Sometimes, you know, I have a client who comes into the space and their high mind speaks to me, and I instantly realize, we somehow know each other. We had a past life or something. I've had it so many times now. And it's really interesting to see that it's a frequency thing. And it's just like, you know, then you start talking to the client or whatever on a 3D level, and you realize you have many shared things going on. It's like, okay. So I find it interesting that as we move forwards, I think we're really being encouraged to not get tricked by the visuals in the 3D or the audios, but we have to feel into our body. And it's just like, how am I experiencing meeting this other person at a frequency level? Am I resonating with them, or am I being repelled by them? Or is it something in between that feels like it could be good, but somehow there's a few blockages? And I think if we are to think about coming together into community, you know, this is really, really important, because a lot of communities of the past have been undone by the fact that the energetics were not right. And the new earth is all about, you know, the higher mind energetics and understanding about the need for clarity and alignment and all of these things. And so if we want to live in community, if we haven't done that work on ourselves, and we want to move in with a bunch of people that have, we're going to get found out pretty quickly, because our stuff is going to come up super quick, right?
Yeah, sure is. Yeah, I mean, I think I can sort of see, I'm just seeing the vista of my life, actually, and sort of seeing how things have fallen into place as you speak there. It's something I've been pursuing for a long time.
So yeah, the other thing I just wanted to come back to just before we move on to the plants and stuff at the end of the show was just this again, coming back to preparation. And what I want to share is about trust, really. And I think this is a big part moving into the plants, and the latter part of the show is like, you know, how much inner work preparation have we done for the Scorpio full moon that just came up? Because I think that moon was really designed astrologically and evolutionary purposes to show us where we still have got inner work that had to be done, so that we could come into communities and be in aligned frequencies with others, or not. But also at the same time, in the external world, you've got this rise in fuel, and possibly, and you know, and we talked about this prior to the show, the cost of food rising. It's been talked about a lot in the press, or shortages even, but isn't actually manifesting yet. So I think that what's important to share is that when we have done our preparations, either our inner work or our external work, is that when crises happen, we don't get knocked off our center alignment. And if we can be in a place of trust because we've done the inner work and we're connected to our higher self and we're following the guidance that our intuition gives us, there really is nothing to be worried about. I just want to make that point because I think what could be experienced over the next couple of months could be very challenging for people living in certain parts of the world. But if we've done the inner preparation and the external preparation, my feeling is it's only going to be for a few months. And so it's just about holding your nerve, like a lot of this process has been, right? So I just wanted to use that as a kind of a pivot point to go into talking about, how we can work with these energies and how certain plants can help keep us in those places.
Absolutely. And the one we've decided to talk about today is an absolute stunning kind of resonance with that whole idea, which is Horsetail. We mentioned it a bit last time, I think, or was it the time before? I think it was the time before, actually. Last time we did Hawthorne. So you wanted to go into Horsetail a little bit more. Are you ready for me to talk a little bit about that now, bro?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I've got the segue there just about right.
Okay.
I've got my page of notes is how to link one topic to the next, so it seems like an effortless flow. But of course, we have planned a little bit. But I absolutely want to hear what you've got to share about Horsetail. This plant's come very strongly into my life recently, and it's a new one for me. But I know that you know quite a bit more about it. So fire away, dude.
Well, I use it. I've been using it, and I've been, I've had a relationship with Horsetail for a long time, ever since it first came up in this must have been 30 years ago, in a garden of a council house that we once occupied in Cambridge. And these things came up in the front garden. I'd never seen anything like them before. They looked like a cross between asparagus and some weird fungus.
Right.
And I just thought, at first I thought these must be toxic, these must be poisonous, and maybe we should just rip them all out. But we didn't. We kind of watched, and this really strange, and these are prehistoric plants. There's no mistaking. They're not members of our more common flowering plants at all. Right. They come from a long way further back. I mean, and they used to come from massive trees, actually. In the time of the dinosaurs, they reckon that the Equisetaceae, the family from which they come, were massive. And now, of course, they're at the most maybe 2 or 3 feet tall. If you get there are 2 species I want to talk about, actually, because they're Horsetail, the one we use medicinally, is Equisetum arvense. Arvense means of the meadow, and that's the one that we had in our front garden and the one that we would use medicinally. There's another one which is called palustre, Equisetum palustre, which is marsh horsetail, which is much happier in kind of wetlands and damp places, although the other horsetail will also seek out streams and canal banks and things like that as well. Of the 2, arvense is the only one that's safe to use. Palustre, they're both actually toxic to livestock, so farmers don't like them much. Palustre may be toxic to humans, but it's arvense that I kind of really want to talk about, because that's the one I've connected with, and the one that we would use in terms of herbal medicine. And we knew it basically as a urinary remedy, in particular in the context of urinary incontinence. So it's a good urinary astringent. It strengthened the bladder against leakages. It also turns out that it deals with kidney stones and acts as a diuretic. It's the kind of paradox that you sometimes get with plants, that it sort of stops you from being incontinent, but at the same time it also helps you wee more easily. So it has this kind of double thing going on, which I'm quite used to with plants. Quite a lot of them do that. They have an affinity with a particular system, but they can go either way depending on what the system actually needs. Now, the other thing that you need to know about Horsetail is it is an absolute treasure trove of minerals, particularly silica, but a lot of other ones too, calcium, potassium, magnesium as well. And its silica content, which is something like between 15 and 20% in the plant. And by the way, the plant, the part of the plant that I discussed previously, the one that comes up like the spike, like the asparagus spike, that's the spore-bearing part of the plant. It disperses the spores and then it wilts away. And what comes up in its place is this beautiful, bright green, feathery plant that grows to about a foot to 18 inches. Maybe sometimes it doesn't get up that high. You can find them at only about 6 to 8 inches as well, but about 18 inches is the top whack for medicinal horsetail. The other one grows much taller, by the way. Palustre will grow up to 2 or 3 feet. This one tends to remain quite short. And it's absolutely, if you look at them, if you're lucky enough to find one, the color is just extraordinary. The green is really iridescent. It's sort of like nothing else you've ever seen, really. It's a bit fern-like, I guess, but it's its own thing, and it's quite extraordinary. There's nothing else around that looks anything like it. So if you ever come across these very, very thin kind of walls, as they're called, of circles of what ostensibly are leaves coming out from a central stem and creating this like bottle brush. In fact, one of its names is bottle brush kind of appearance. And it turns out that it also historically, and in terms of sort of myth and legend, has been equated a lot with armor, because the high silicon content gives it a very tough texture, and this has been found useful for cleaning metal and imparting a shine to your armor, to your breastplate, to your helmet, etc., etc. So it was used in the past to clean metal garments, i.e. arms and things that people would wear when they went into battle. And in terms of battle, it also transpires that horsetail has in folkloric terms a connection rather like nettle with protection, with protecting boundaries, particularly, with protecting and resolving almost like psychic space. So strengthening resolve, strengthening boundaries, and cleansing. And here's the real resonance of what we were talking about: cleansing emotional rubble and debris. So it kind of does, when it presented itself to me first, I think I might have told you about this. I did a journey with it, and I saw it actually as the green color that I spoke about was sort of gave way in my visions to a kind of multicolored, almost rainbow-like coloration that it had. But I got this message from it, which was really weird, and it got me thinking a lot, and I thought about it a lot since as well. And it said, you know, I asked how it did what it did, and he, I think it's a he, told me, I become what I want to destroy. And that seemed to embody the paradox that I see in the plant, because for example, if you think about maintaining structure, maintaining boundaries is all about structure. So it helps us with structure. In Chinese medicine, it would be called a yang tonic. It helps us to firm up the structure of the body. But at the same time, it also breaks down structures. It breaks down kidney stones, for example. There's a lot of data coming from the German folkloric tradition about it breaking down cancer as well. So it's much in the spotlight amongst pharmaceutical companies looking for new cancer drugs at the moment. But I've heard stories about people curing cancer just by drinking horsetail, which of course, by the way, boys and girls listening, do not do this or repeat it or pretend that horsetail is in any way, shape or form a cure for cancer, because that will get us chucked off YouTube faster than anything, I suspect. But just to put in the mix that it does have that reputation. So this sort of double-edged thing of being able to break down structures, get rid of debris, but at the same time firm up the structures that you want, I think is really, really interesting about this herb.
Wow. Thank you, bro, so much there. And of course, you know, what I love about our plant discussions is that we're both coming at it sort of from the physical herbal perspective, but also then delving into the folkloric traditions and mythology around the plants, because that's actually where we often find the clues about the more kind of 5D aspects of the plant's intelligence. And as I've often said, you know, what we see with plants is really the manifestation in the 3D of a very, very realized being who wants to share certain gifts and teachings with us. And you know, so much just to respond to. I mean, horsetail feels like it's from a different planet, a pre-Earth, a dinosaur Earth. And you know, I was talking about this with a friend just yesterday when we were studying the mysteries with Michael Dunning. he would often talk about the pre-solar Earth, when Earth was bathed in a Saturnian light, what we would call the other world. It's the place that we can still connect to, the twilight world. And at that time, we had a different gravitational field on the planet, apparently. And that's what allowed the bigger animals like the dinosaurs and giant trees, and maybe some of the audience out there have even seen pictures of fossilized giant mushrooms. I mean, those are pretty incredible. So giant horsetail makes perfect sense, but it also speaks to me of a different type of energy in those times, where things could be much bigger or could live longer, or so everything has kind of got reduced and shrunk down, including us as humans, right? Our lifespan has shrunk, our body size has shrunk. So I find that interesting, but there is a very off-planet feel, I think, to horsetail. But what's really catching my attention is its kind of transformational capacities. And sure, we have to put disclaimers about any plant that can really do any healing that's outside of the scientific jurisdiction of the big pharma companies, because we're not allowed to talk about those things. But, my understanding with cancer is that it's really, it's the manifestation in the body of deep-rooted emotional trauma that's unresolved. In some way, and that can be many different types of trauma. But how I'm wondering, does horsetail break that down without necessarily having to bring it into the conscious awareness? And this idea of cleansing emotional rubble and debris, that's interesting, Barry. Anything you'd like to add to that?
No, well, maybe I'm in awe of the ability of plants to perform healing at quantum levels, though, and I think that's what we're looking at here. One of the glories really of being involved in plant medicine, at whatever level, actually, at the level that I typically do it as a herbalist, a practicing herbalist, prescribing for people, but also the level that you do it, and I've been learning about, which is the energetic, and also the spiritual, the 5D level, if you like. Whatever level you work with plants, they are powerful healers. I sometimes think much more powerful than us, but that might just be a little bit of kind of self-defamation there. I don't really want to get, or self-deprecation. We are also powerful healers, but I think we carry so much baggage that it prevents us sometimes from being able to do our job effectively, whereas the plants go straight in there and they do it. And this whole thing about, this is why the pharmaceuticals people can't get their heads around plant medicine. It's because the plant goes in there and it has a dialogue. There have been attempts to frame this as some kind of language between receptors and chemicals. It kind of sets up certain reactions at receptor sites so that the body can either block or accept the healing. But I think it's a lot deeper than that. I think it's plant consciousness, in the best sense of the word, that knows what the body needs and is able to supply that. And I'm quite often, I was very struck when I was looking at horsetail at the incredible similarities with nettle in terms of the things I know about nettle and the things that I use nettle for. Again, a herb that's very much directed at the urinary tract, kidneys, bladder, etc., but also on the energetic level. The guarding quality of nettle, the Roman centurion, as I think you brought forward at one point. And there's something about the visual language of horsetail that resonates with that a lot as well. And I think that when we're on that level, we maybe don't have to consciously trawl through all of that emotional baggage. Maybe we can just allow it to be broken up and blown out of our aura.
I think that's a really important point. We're at a time when we're all needing to process and let go of so much. And, speaking from personal experience, even this week, it's the emotional charge behind situations that gets us wrapped up in the 3 and 4D. And if we can really step away from that and observe ourselves from that eagle's perch, that 5D perspective, and do the healing work there, then it can be almost instant, the effect, and stuff that could be really traumatizing some years ago and maybe taken years of therapy or whatever to work through, actually right now, in my own experience, can be worked through super quick. But we have to kind of be able to go to a non-dual awareness and see our emotional expressions and how we've got wrapped up in drama, and just kind of separate out and then release, and we can, certainly I can, and maybe other healers too, is, do the energetic healing work at that level, so that in the body, there isn't that kind of trapped energy. And I really feel that horsetail is going to be a plant that's going to help guide us to a clearer connection with a 5D consciousness. There's also to me, like we have a horsetail growing here, but it looks very much like a Harry Potter wand. And, you know, there's this idea of alignment to the cosmic energies, and also this whole kind of silica, high silica content speaks to me of more crystalline humans, that we are becoming more crystalline and higher frequency. So maybe our energetic structure, as you talked about, you know, removing one structure and replacing it with a new one, is really what Horsetail's offering us. It's offering us the opportunity to replace the emotional rubble and debris of our previous 3D cells with perhaps a more crystalline silica content that allows us to be much more receptive, perhaps, to cosmic energies.
I think that's not outside the bounds of possibility, if I'm honest. I think it's a plant that I am motivated to explore in a lot more depth, actually. I mean, I've known about it for a long time. We put it into a formula that we do for strengthening bones. This is the other thing I didn't say about it, actually. It's very, very good for the musculoskeletal system. It strengthens muscles and bones, and it can repair ligaments and cartilage and all sorts of things. I should be taking bucket loads of it. I've got going on.
I think we both really need this plant, right, bro? I think we're talking about it. We're like, oh my God, I think I need this.
Yeah, absolutely. On the sort of macro level, this is what it does as well. So yeah, super useful and wonderful. The silica, by the way, is also able to be converted, is bioavailable, and it can be converted by the body to calcium. So if you've got calcium deficiencies, we use it for people with HRT, you know, not with HRT, what people use HRT for, which is osteoporosis and osteopenia in you know, postmenopausal women. A lot of Horsetail goes into a formula that we use for that kind of thing as well. We have a thing called bone, flesh and cartilage, which is actually borrowed from an old American herbalist, Dr. John Christopher. My students, if they're listening, will know who that is in some depth. But he originally did it as kind of a wound healing poultice. So, and actually Horsetail can be used in that way. It can be used topically as well. It can be used as a poultice to repair bone breaks and flesh wounds and things like that as well. Christopher didn't use Horsetail in his formula, but when we decided to make an internal version of it, something which would be a food for those structures in the body, Horsetail and nettle also went into that as well. A number of other things which maybe we'll visit at some stage in the future. So yeah, it's been with me a long time, but I never tire of you know, kind of refreshing my relationship with these plants.
Wow, thank you, bro, so much there. I mean, I feel like the journey with Horsetail is just beginning, and I think possibly there might even be another future show or interview, a special about Horsetail, because what you've just showed with me has really got my my plant spirit mind working. I'm just like, wow, this is a plant that's offering this kind of almost an internal restructuring, whether it's at the bone level with calcium, whether it's at a silica level to make us, you know, perhaps a little bit more crystalline, but also to flush out, you know, the emotional debris, perhaps from the kidneys. And it, you know, and plus it's also it has the qualities of a semiconductor, so it means that we can also work with it to weather the cosmic storms that we've been experiencing, the solar flares. And particularly if we're used to doing a lot of energy work, and the ancients knew this, and they were often, you know, I think this is one of the reasons the pyramids were built, is that they were often concerned about being out of body in the higher realms and then getting hit with a solar flare, which would be very, very detrimental and possibly make it difficult to come back into the physical body. So I feel there's a lot to be explored around this, and how it's going to help us become much more fluid in our channel connection to other aspects of ourself, whether it's our 4D self, 5D, or beyond that even. You know, as we ascend and transition from our current state of human beingness to, I believe, a different type of human beingness, these access to these other aspects of ourself are going to become, I think, generally a lot more available for everybody, you know. With the current move through the plasma belt and whatever, you know, and all of the cosmic solar flares, it's like this shield has gone down on the planet, and so it's so much more easy to have energetic connections, and also a lot of the unhelpful energy of the matrix has also been removed over the last few weeks. And so you know, I think the April the 12th conjunction we had was really powerful in that it opened up the field of the planet much more easily for people like us to be able to extract information or connect to other parts of ourselves. And I really feel that Horsetail is a plant that's going to help us do that. So yeah, the beginning of a journey, bro. I love it when plants step forwards like this and they start making themselves known to a few of us, and then we start investigating, and then suddenly all of these kind of wonderful extra bits of information coming that speak to, certainly of me, of the quantum nature of plants, and in this case Horsetail. So thank you, bro, for that. That was super interesting.
You are very welcome. I'm so glad to be able to share that, actually, because it's a plant that's been with me for a long time, and it's not one of the obvious ones, but it's been very quietly there. Very powerful.
Well, look, if you uncover any more, please do feel free to share. We're always going to loop back to plants because we're always learning something new, and nettle is another wonderful plant that we'll probably talk about again. But we've run out of time, dude. We're already running a little bit over our normal hour-long slot today. But do you have any final thoughts you wish to share with people out there as we head into the next couple of weeks before the next show? And the astrology suggests at the end of May, beginning of June is going to be a little bit challenging. So do you have a final thought to share?
I think just trust. As we were saying earlier, trust that you're in the right place at the right time. Everything's going to work out. Just sit with it. Stick to your guns, whatever you have to do, but just stay in that place of trust and centeredness, and we'll all get through.
Couldn't agree more, bro. I think that's really important. And good plant for grounding and centering, so you're in a place of trust, is the wonderful oak, the master of the three doors. And I'm sure that's a plant or a tree that we're going to be talking about in the future. But thank you, bro, for a wonderful show. We covered a lot of ground there today. We are in very, very interesting times, but I just want to reach out to our audience again and say, look, there are two very distinct timelines opening up here. One is very, very new earth, higher mind, back with the plants, working with plants like Horsetail in a new way, or the other one is perhaps something a little bit less pleasant. And I really feel that the what's the word I'm looking for here? The onus is on us as individuals to choose the frequencies that we want for ourselves, but that will also help the world change. It's true that one person can make a big difference. And if we clean ourselves up and we get to a higher mind, that does ripple through the collective. And then the 100th monkey effect kicks in, and it enables other people also to do that journey. So, it really does come down to each and every one of us. Be strong, be in a place of trust, be in a place of intuition, and enjoy the ride, man. Some of us have waited a very, very, very long time for all of this to come to pass. And I think that this is a time to be excited and to really think clearly about what do we each want for our own futures. What is it that makes our hearts sing? And what is it that we want to share with the world? So thank you, bro. As always, please do give me the link to your Gates track. I feel like probably I want to listen to that, and probably a fair bit of our audience do too. And I look forward to the next raucous edition of Web of Wyrd. So thank you, bro. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time. Take care. Bye for now.